I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
So we can pick back during the pledge.
Let's have roll call and see who's here.
Councilmember Coffey.
Here.
Commissioner, I should say. Commissioner Coffey. Commissioner
Fine.
Barnett.
Present.
Commissioner Wood.
Here.
Commissioner Zinda.
Here.
Chair Waker.
Here. I'm fairly confident that there is no one that needs to comment on public comment, so we're going to go directly to item 4. Are there any conflicts of interest on the one item we have tonight? And we do have a public hearing tonight, but
You want to hear from
But no
staff?
public.
we will hear from Mr. McKinley
All right.
first.
Thank you, Chairman Winger, honorable planning commissioners. This is a pretty simple sounding topic tonight. We're consistently looking for ways to improve the wording and clarifications of our code, especially as we kind of come up against situations to where perhaps a strict interpretation of it, is not as beneficial to, like, let's say, staff and the community. Essentially, what we have found is that there are some, just because of the nature of an older city, there's a lot of different ways that property has been divided and transferred and used over the last 100 years. And much of it was done, a lot of it has been stuff that was done before we even had a zoning code or a subdivision code. And in this case, we have some landlocked parcels in the city, for one thing. And also, in the future, there, when people do subdivisions, sometimes they don't necessarily want to dedicate a public street, to the city, or sometimes, and which is another trend that probably we might see an increase of, is the city doesn't really feel like accepting a dedication, an offer of dedication to the for a street. That's kind of how that is. Like the subdivision, like let's say it's a regular housing tract type of subdivision, all the streets you see, in there are typically dedicated to the city, and it's called a dedicated right-of-way. And it's not necessarily a parcel, in fee title, but it's just dedicated to the city. And of course, we have certain standards for our streets and stuff. So to deal with the potential of having problems with landlocked parcels, I discovered that our the definition of building site actually restricts building on parcels that don't have street frontage. I mean, they're talking about street frontage. So the definition of a building site is such that it says having its principal frontage on a street, road, highway, or waterway. So I'm not sure when a waterway would come into play here, but it kind of tells me that they're not necessarily hung up on having a street with curb and gutters if we're going to allow waterways. But that's just probably because it was written in 1963, and it was probably just that's how they were written back in those days. So we have this definition of a building site that seems to exclude anything that doesn't have frontage. So that means when a subdivision is proposed to have private roads, and let's say it's serving a parcels with private roads, well, technically that's not a building site. So we felt it would be easy fix to just fix it and adjust the definition of the building site, and then create a new section that said, because what we're going to do is refer to the definition of a building site to include a reference to a code section that kind of spells it out on what kind of access that we're looking for. So that's kind of where we're at on there. So the current code, as I just said, requires building sites to have principal, frontage on a street. Sometimes in a subdivision code, in the design standards, they have the same type of language. In our subdivision code, there is none of that. So it does kind of kind of rely on the zoning code to talk about what sites are buildable or not. So I'll just get to there was a change, though. I discovered an error, and it was pointed out to me in a staff meeting yesterday as well, that I'm saying that in this, my proposed, well, let's just get on, let me back up a minute. So the proposed definition of a building site, it still leaves in there having its principal frontage on a street, road, highway, or waterway, but also we add the option of having a recorded access easement or other lawful access as provided in section 18 point blank, whenever, I don't know the number we're going to assign to that. So then we refer to that section. So since this is a new section, we're not really striking out anything. But what we're saying is, all new parcels of land and land uses shall have legal access from a publicly maintained street or may derive access from a privately maintained road or approved access easement meeting the standards. Now, here's where I was in error, adopted by the city. They don't really have standards adopted for easements or access easements. It's mainly streets. So, again, to be hung up on a word would be not beneficial. So we decided to strike adopted and just say deemed appropriate by the city. And then typically that you guys would help on that because you do the review for parcel maps. You're the actual final, well, I don't think you are, parcel maps, which are 4 parcels or less, and tentative maps. So you guys would be able to weigh in and evaluate a access easement or private road and make recommendations to council. So that's basically the whole thing. In conclusion, we're clarifying the definition of building site to include access easements, and we're providing a new section that confirms that during the subdivision review and approval, you can have a privately maintained road or approved access easement meeting the standards deemed appropriate by the city during subdivision review and approval. And that's it. But I do want to talk a little bit about, when we do these adoptions, we're supposed to make sure that it is indeed consistent with the current general plan. And essentially, this kind of brings into play some of the goals and objectives that we have in our current housing element. We've agreed that we're supposed to allow, not build, but allow for development of a certain amount of housing units in the next 5-year period. I think our draft general plan kind of extends that out to 2040, but the real housing element, the one that's registered down at the state and all that, we want to be able to promote diversity of housing, from all income groups. Not, housing elements a lot of times deal with low and very low income earners, but all spectrum is what we've heard during the new general plan community meetings, is that the community wants a diversity of housing available here, not just for the low and very low income bracket. So specifically, policy 11B expresses the desire for attractive and safe access to commercial properties and allow for shared access to commercial projects. So that's off the housing, but in the land use element, they do want a safe access. So it doesn't say via street or via, it just says safe access. And so hence we have that section that says that you can make it derived from a city street, but the ultimate goal is to lawfully recorded safe access easements to typically the back lot, like you have a front house, and a lot of times they have a flag lot. Well, flag lots are a little problematic, and this is basically the same idea, but it's just an access easement that, of course they can't build, the front lot people can't build on that access easement. It's typically a shared driveway of some sort. Now, depending on how how many units we're gonna be serving with this access, that's when the Public Works and everybody has to weigh in, and the fire department about its width and, you know, the proper turnarounds at the end. And that all comes out in the pre-application meeting during when we're designing, you know, the project. So again, it's just a mechanism to allow these to occur without necessarily being public streets. So,
So can I clarify? So without that approved and recorded access easement, nothing can happen?
right, you really can't, right, because there's no way to get to that property back there. Like, so, you know, it's usually agreed upon too by the two property owners. It's
Right.
nothing that we make them do. It's just like, let's say, you know, you own a parcel that's this
Oh,
big.
yeah.
and
I
you-
know what an easement is.
Yeah, and so
I
like,
just
so we
wanted
just
to
want to be able to
clear-
let them get back there, and it's recorded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and the width and the dimensions and the length of it even, would be something that we evaluate during the phases. And that really has a lot to do with what the building code says and what the fire code says. And those laws there's not much wiggle room there, you know, as far as safety goes. I would say the longer it gets, the wider it should probably be, and, you know, definitely a safe turnaround at the end. So it's essentially just clarifying the fact that, yeah, we would welcome private roads if that's private access and private roadways, if that's exactly what the applicant is planning to do. And again, sometimes an applicant might say, I want to dedicate this street to the city, and they had all these, you know, lots that are fronting it. And the city might say, you know, we really aren't going to take that dedication. So all of a sudden, that becomes a private road, and that leaves a big question whether that's legal or not, because it's these parcels, all of a sudden, if approved this way, don't necessarily have public street frontage. So this is just trying to clean house a little bit and clarify the code to people. And it will help with the city's ability to accommodate a certain number of housing units on the housing side to some properties that may or may not be landlocked. Or in the future, if there's a subdivision application that proposes private roadways, this would be allowed.
Plus, it brings things in line with some situations that are already existing within the town that fit into that private easement.
Right, and like, I know that there's probably instances where we've recorded easements and allowed this to happen many times already, but kind of like not being aware really technically that it's not necessarily consistent with the municipal code. I don't know of any per se
Right
specifically.
behind my house.
Really? Okay, well then,
Ripon
then
Way
you
is-
know what the issue is.
Ripon Way is a private road.
Okay, so essentially, this is what we're doing. We're cleaning it up to make that possible.
So if it turns out that the city doesn't want to take a dedication, then it comes before us for,
Well, actually, you would, in a typical subdivision application, you guys, it's just like anything else that the council's the final say. You look at the map the same way they would, and we'd look at the same aspects, and you'd make recommendations. So if you think they should accept, you just kind of recommend to council that they adopt or approve the subdivision,
so
or
we can.
or deny it.
We
or
can
whatever.
recommend to council that they take a dedication of a street.
Right, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to take your recommendation.
I know.
So, this would make that possible still, you know. A lot of people would rather do a private road, what I've been gathering. I think it's because they don't, you know, maybe the width is way too overkill, like for the short amount of time, length of the road. You know, a 60-foot right-of-way is quite a big thing for like a residential street. And if you're only serving like one or two parcels on that for maybe 100 feet back, that doesn't necessarily make sense, you know, to make a person, or to not even allow that building site, that would be a fine building site, but it just doesn't have street frontage. But-
Usually they
But you
end up-
can have access by an easement. It doesn't make sense to staff and some of the public that I've talked to over the years, not just on this, you know, just the last few days. I'm just talking about throughout my career.
Usually
The-
private roads end up as dirt though, don't they? 'Cause they don't
That's,
wanna-
my question was,
Well, that's the thing. I don't think it should be dirt.
there's a
And that-
lot, there's
yeah,
a lot
'cause
of
see,
them
that's
around.
that's like this, what it means by the standards deemed appropriate. You know, if we had we do adopt standards, but they're the City of Reading's construction standards, and that's all paved. So, if it's, I don't really see it where it would be advantageous not to have it paved, so, yeah.
But if the city turns down the dedication of the road,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just the homeowners, they have to pave that?
Yeah, well, actually,
Road?
if it's a private road, it's a private road, and it would be a homeowners association
But what if they
maintained-
don't have the money to pave it? I have friends that live up off of
usually
Old
the case.
Stage, and,
Yeah.
you know, it's a
Well-
private road, and it's yucky, and it's gravelly.
Right.
And when it snows, everybody expects their neighbor to get out and
Oh,
snow
yeah.
plow it instead of.
Oh, yeah, there's always that
It's-
one
it's a
person that never
mess.
pays.
It's a mess.
Right, well, I think that those appropriate standards are mentioned, so we will think of standards. Unfortunately, we just don't have width and length standards for access easements, but for any private road, I'm sure that the standards for a road would apply.
A city can have standards for a private road, but the homeowners don't have to abide by those standards. do
Well,
they? 'Cause
yeah,
it's still-
if they want to get their subdivision approved with this private road, definitely, the
Okay.
city says it's got to be this wide, it's got to be this, you know. But if it's just an access easement, like, let's say it's an easy access easement to the back lot. Well, typically, that's a shared driveway. And I don't know, do we require driveways to be paved? In my old city, we did, and it was because dust, you know, dust and all that stuff, but
Are there any-
yeah.
Are there
so-
any circumstances where the city and the homeowners have a joint responsibility in maintaining the road?
Not that I'm aware of at this point. I could probably find out for you, but, yeah, not that I know of.
There's just certain things that are kind of out of our control, so it's, yeah, there's nothing you can do about
Like
it.
in a PUD, for example, you know, that's restricted to a certain size of a project, but they can design their own site and get the roads put in privately to different standards than what you typically think of as a single, you know, like a what they would call just a residential street. Like if it's a normal looking subdivision, like a PUD or something, they have that mechanism already, I believe. But still, we have this problem with the definition of a building site that says it has to be on a street, road, or highway, public street, road, or highway. So it's just, to that end, it's just a minor, you know, or recorded access easement or other lawful access as provided in section whatever. And then, when reviewing these projects, Planning Commission and the City Council, there would be standards that we would be deeming appropriate, and that would be from input from the fire chief and from Public Works, and you know, those standards would be set forth in the proposal. So if you guys, let's say, don't think it's appropriate, and then you make that recommendation to the city council as well, that, you know, maybe this easement needs to be wider. Maybe these streets, that curve might not be, you know, safe, you know.
Are
But
there-
basically, it's gonna come to you with staff, like Public Works and Fire, you know, recommendations. Usually when you get the map, it's gonna be as a result of all the staff input prior to you guys getting it, but,
Would it be possible or acceptable to have some general standards? And you can have specific standards for a specific piece of property, but is there a way to have a general set of standards that apply
Well,
to every?
Sounds like
Everything?
they do.
Like, actually, they would be derived from our adopted street standards.
Okay.
But if it's not appropriate, like, let's say that an alternative to that is deemed appropriate by you guys and the city council, then it's okay.
All right.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the Reading, if the Reading construction standards pretty much have a matrix with all sorts of levels of street, and at the same time, that's just for the width of the right-of-way. But at the same time, they have construction standards. That's really what the gist of these standards are, talking about how thick the pavement's supposed to be, what kind of curb you're supposed to have. So there are standards to apply to a private roadway. Not so sure that those same standards would apply to a very short easement to the back lot. But, you know, like, let's say you have an acre piece of property and you want to divide it up, and it has access, the acre piece has access on a public street, but you're gonna have like a little horseshoe road in there or something. That would be, if the applicant wishes, they put that in a private road, or if the city already says, we're not gonna take that dedication. Most likely, you're not gonna get that street dedicated, we're gonna reject your offer. Well, then it's a private road, and it would just be built to standards that you guys deem appropriate, but it would still be paved, and, you know, because the construction standards say so, you know, so.
What would happen if, if Reading makes a change in their standards? How would we know that?
Well, they
They-
do that
they
all the
made a
time,
change.
as a matter of fact.
Huh?
I think they just updated them in the last 3 or 4 years, or 5 years, because in my old career, I updated the design standards for the subdivision ordinance, and I was basing it on their standards. And when I called them, they said, well, I gotta warn you, we're updating those, but we've adopted them.
So-
So is most cities, small cities in the area, by the way, because it's really a lot of technical
Yeah.
stuff that would be amazingly expensive to create our own.
Reinvent.
And so we just kind of have an open-ended adoption that's, you know,
Mm-hmm.
says the Reading construction standards and any subsequent, you know, version.
Gotcha.
So,
If it doesn't apply, you just use a variance.
right, or something like that. So of course,
Wonder who Reading copies then.
yeah, really, good question. So the current general plan supports this minor adjustment by allowing alternative access to landlocked parcels. It both helps the future opportunities for the diversity of housing that we desire, and also access to commercial properties. Now, that's, in the commercial world, that's kind of where the microscope would come out, and you'd be looking at, you know, the deemed appropriate standards would most likely be just what the, you know, rating standards would call for. But, you know, it's kind of very flexible. Without the adopted standards for easements, we're kind of like on our own for that. But the bottom line is, we feel it would be best to allow landlocked parcels without direct street frontage to be built on, basically if there's safe access that's recorded and, you know, up to a certain standard that's, you know, that is actually kind of settled on during the review process. So, it is subject to the California Environmental Quality Act. However, this is a minor adjustment and it's not necessarily causing or allowing anything that would be further impacts to the environment, except for utilizing certain sites that technically we can't right now. So there is there's an exemption for that, and it's kind of like the general rule exemption. It's CEQA Guidelines Section 15061 B, subsection B3. And it says that activity is covered by the general rule, which exempts activities that can be seen with certainty to have no possibility for causing significant effect on the environment. So my backup for that is that this adjustment policy only clarifies the process for providing buildable parcels and an option for gaining legally recognized access to parcels without a street or alley frontage. There are no physical impacts to the environment by allowing easement access to landlocked properties. Future projects that may be proposed on parcels granted are subject to CEQA as applicable. See, that's the most important part. If we were exempting something that was killing and terminating the CEQA process, like, and so making everything else exempt from, but no, if we have a parcel that's being proposed for a subdivision, let's say, it's gonna be subject to CEQA. So we'll be applying CEQA to the project, not necessarily the policy change. It's a very broad thing down to a specific thing. So that's about it. So my conclusion is that I'm recommending that we, first of all, understand that this is actually the proposed language. It's not too different than what was there, except that there really are no standards for easements. That was my mistake, I'm sorry. And so I'm recommending that the Planning Commission recommend to council to adopt these changes to the city's zoning code and adopt the finding of exemption discussed above. So that's it.
Are there any comments or questions?
Not a one?
No, not this time.
Well, it sounds like a pretty simple, straightforward thing, so we would need someone to move this language.
And we'll have to add, as modified by,
If they really want to see paving, you can definitely make that recommendation to council. Leave it up to
Could add it as a modification or a,
We'll just say, if you agree to this language, but you would really like to see these roads or these accesses paved.
I will make a motion that we adopt, is that motion right, or are we moving?
move.
I move that we adopt the zoning code text amendment as written, is that okay?
or as presented by staff.
As presented by staff, with the recommendation that all right-of-ways be paved,
Private roads?
private roads? Is the
Access
wording on that?
easements?
Access easements be paved?
What's the correct terminology of?
I don't know.
We're calling it access. All
So-
private access, all privately maintained roads.
So the concern I would have there is that, are we going to be limiting these future easements to only paved sections? So, for example, if it was, say, a half acre parcel, and you had someone who wanted to build a home on the back half, and they divided that parcel, and we're talking a 20-foot easement, do we want to require that they pave that, or that they put in like a road base? I would think that would be something that would be left to the design review process.
Yeah, I
when
have a problem
development
with
occurs.
requiring that all access easements be paved.
And
I think there are times when it might not be appropriate, or it would be financially
Restrictive.
disadvantage to the people, or something like that. It can cost a lot of money paving roads.
Could we have a language that encourages?
Well, you can recommend anything you want, it's up to the council to adopt, so
Right.
they might
Right.
just throw it out, but that's up to the.
Hopefully.
I can withdraw my motion if somebody wants to make a different one.
I don't know how to do that.
You did withdraw, because actually you shouldn't discuss until there's a second, so.
Sorry.
There was no motion.
There's no second. So I will move that we adopt the text as presented by staff for the zoning code amendment.
And make the finding of exemption as well. We have to, we have to say that,
Oh, yes,
we're going to
and,
adopt the notice of exemption. It's not
yes,
attached.
and adopt the
but-
notice of exemption.
Oh, it is? It's on the back?
it's right
We're
here.
adopting this notice of exemption. Yeah.
I second that.
It has been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay?
It, it has passed, the motion has passed. And That is,
work.
that is what we were sent here to do.
Well, yeah.
Are there any announcements or commissioner reports? Anything you want to share?
I'm looking forward to attending the Hunger Summit meeting at Great Northern Services tomorrow. And I'll let you know how that goes. I think it's a very interesting program, and they have Paula Reynolds is new to Great Northern and will be heading that. So I'm looking forward to.
Haven't they already had one?
No, this is the first one.
This is the first one.
What's her position with Great Northern?
Hmm?
What's her position with Great Northern? She's got on board?
It's a whole bunch of gobble, I have no
Oh,
idea. I can't remember right off my top, but she's there to coordinate food security throughout the to help Great Northern coordinate food security throughout the county, I believe, which
good.
includes grant writing and meetings like this, organizing people, stuff like that, so.
Well, tomorrow night is the Chamber of Commerce Board meeting, and we hope to finalize plans for tree lighting and caroling and hot chocolate and cookies on the 2nd, on December the 2nd. So be watching for more information on that, and that'll be in Centennial Plaza like it usually is. We didn't have it last year, so we're trying to make sure that we have it this year, so it'd be Saturday the 2nd.
All right.
Nice.
Staff reports?
I gave you the reminder.
Training, do your training.
Friendly reminder.
Do have any questions you can ask me, but also the Run for Food, the turkey trot.
Yes.
Is on
Thanksgiving.
Thursday, next Thursday on Thanksgiving Day. The city has 4 free entries, and I haven't had any response from council that wants a free entry. So if any of you are,
I've got 3 to give out myself, so.
oh, yeah, if you're interested, I can forward you the email.
Nice. And you don't have to run, you can walk.
Yeah,
You
it's
can
running.
skip, you can,
Family members coming or whatever.
mhm.
So, anyway.
Oh, great.
Run for Food.
Thanks for bringing that up.
It's really fun, but it's really cold usually, so.
Very cold, very fun.
Dress
You need to
appropriately.
keep moving. Well, wonderful.
I have nothing, so except
Okay.
happy Thanksgiving, and thanks again for coming out and helping
Thank you.
and volunteering to be on the planning.
Happy turkey to you
Happy
also.
Thanksgiving to both of you. Yeah.
I'll move that we adjourn.
It's been moved. We have a second.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yay. Thank you. Thank you. You jumped in
One of the
before I
shorter
forgot.
meetings.
I had it in my head. Don't forget to get a
Don't
motion.
forget to move.
Everybody got this. Non-stop.